This is the Aftermath series. This is a collection of stories about Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria through the lens of my family. The series includes replays of episodes from this past year, as well as new content. This is a talk with my mom. I visited Puerto Rico Thanksgiving of last year to see my family, and of course I shoved a microphone in their faces. Originally, I aired this as 2 episodes, but I've combined them both here. I also refer back to a previous conversation I had with Dr. Jacob Remes. That was in Disasters, a bonus episode. If you haven't heard that interview, don't worry. This will make sense, but you should listen to it because it's good and Jacob is really smart. Here's Aftermath. I start with my mother, and more from my mother. This is Change Over Time, a podcast where I think historically about things I geek. I'm Daniel Horowitz Garcia, the alternative historian. It's been more than 100 days since Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. Somewhere around half of the island's population still doesn't have power. This is the longest power outage in U.S. history. Between a quarter and a fifth of residents lack water. My immediate family is no longer included in those numbers. My mother and brother had power about a month after the storm. My grandparents got running water early in November and power on Christmas Eve. My grandmother celebrated by doing laundry. That makes total sense. You have to know her. This episode marks the first in a series called Aftermath, a multi-episode look at Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria through the lens of my family. I'm starting with my mom. Doña Edna lives in the southwestern part of the island. I visited my family over Thanksgiving to make sure they were okay. As part of that, I stuck a microphone in everyone's face and told them to relive traumatic events. It was weird, but the interviews were great. In this conversation, we do talk a bit about life right after the storm. But mostly what I talked with my mom was how this is going to impact politics. This is my mom, Doña Edna Garcia.
I'm Doña Edna, your mother. Well, it was terrible. It was a very, very bad experience because it came by so slow. It stayed over the island over 7 hours. 7 miles per hour. It lasted so long. It was terrible. First we had the winds from the hurricane, and then the eye went by, and then in the afternoon there was some sort of tornadoes that kept hitting and breaking the trees and ripping out the roofs, the house roofs. It was terrible. It was a very bad experience. And if that wasn't enough, after the hurricane, the communication just collapsed. No telephone, nothing, no light, no water. It was absolutely terrible. Practically all the bridges in the island collapsed. The roads collapsed. The sea came through by Joyuda and it just swept everything away. In Maunabo, in Guardarraya, the sea swept everything away. All the lines, the power lines fell. It has been absolutely terrible. And the response from the government has been even worse. All the lights, the roads, the street lights were gone. They flew away. So you couldn't cross the street. You had to be very careful. We went down about 3 days later to see the devastation and to see what had happened. And then about a week, we had the police, usually the National Guard, doing the traffic. But you know what's funny? Let me tell you. The day of the hurricane, there was a girl from Puerto Real that went into labor. And the trees on the State Road 308, nobody could go through. So her husband and the neighbors got a digger. They put the woman in labor and the digger, and they went cutting off the trees and making just a path for the digger to go through to bring her to the Cabo Rojo Hospital, and the baby was born in Cabo Rojo Hospital. That spread through the town like crazy. So we were very proud of that because everybody helped. Before the National Guard, before anybody from the government, the State Road 308, everybody, men from Puerto Real and from this area, went and they started cutting and making a path for at least one car to go by.
A few episodes back, I interviewed Dr. Jacob Remes. He's a disaster historian, and we talked for a while about disasters in general, Puerto Rico in particular, and what one should expect. I'm thinking about this particular part of our conversation.
In the interior of Puerto Rico, right, there are towns in which the state was not present for like 2 weeks, right? Like there was like no communication, there was no relief, there was no aid. Not from Washington, but also not from San Juan. And people there, I don't know what they did, but people there had to figure out how to survive and how to help each other and how to sort of contribute to mutual aid without the state, without any of those ordinary resources, those ordinary sort of social resources. And that is both terrible, right? But also really exciting, right? It's this moment in which people are forced by privation to come up with something really creative and new. And possibly that moment, those 2 weeks of solidarity and helping each other because they had no choice, can be brought forward into time when the state finally restores itself and people can remember that, and it will change, and it can change politics.
This story from my mother highlights two dynamics, both terrible and exciting. A moment when people came up with something creative and new. You could hear in my mother's voice how excited she was that this happened. We're not just talking about a road. There's pride because people came together and did something for themselves in a moment of crisis. Jacob edges this forward, though. Can the moment of solidarity, the moment of helping each other when you had no choice, be brought forward to change politics? We'll talk about this after the break.
Hi, I'm Martin Baum, and I'm the host of Story Untold, a podcast about ordinary people with extraordinary lives. From traveling the world and working as a journalist, I've seen that everyone has a story to tell, and on this podcast, you get to hear those stories. Stories like Richard Holmes, a speech-language pathologist and former professional mountain biker who talks about his experience with a stutter.
You want to, advertise yourself as much as you can, and I would give people a name I thought was easier to say.
Stories like Martha Lenio, a former NASA mission commander who spent 8 months simulating life on Mars.
What they're trying to get at is how you pick a crew and support a crew for these long-duration isolated space missions without, everyone going crazy and killing each other.
Story Untold is about the incredible things that happen in life, the moments that change everything. Head to your favorite podcast app and search Story Untold, or head to storyuntold.blueberry.com. Enjoy the show.
Now let's get back to the episode. The aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico saw moments of solidarity. The question is, will those moments lead to political change? Well, let's go back to my mom for an answer.
Started with the truckers. They were the first one to hang a big Puerto Rican flag on their trucks. And you would see it coming and coming and coming. And I was wondering, gee, what's happening? Maybe it's just a group of truckers. But then it has filtered out to everybody. All of a sudden you see it in all the cars. People are flying the Puerto Rican flag. I see it as a movement of a sentiment of nacionalismo. Nacionalismo patrio. I see it. I think there's an awakening of the people. And I see this opportunity, I see it as a way to rebuild a new Puerto Rico with good politicians, with trying to do away with the corruption the most we can, with transparency in the government. I think it's a good opportunity to create a movement to change the way politics are in Puerto Rico. And I'm very glad to see every car with a Puerto Rican flag flying high and the houses with the flags up high. I think we do deserve this sentiment of nacionalismo.
To be clear, I did not see every car with a flag on it. It was more like a third. Still, given how segmented Puerto Rican politics can be, a third of the people taking the same action can easily be seen as a lot. Regardless of the exact number, my mom definitely sees a lot of people getting behind this sentiment. She also sees a lot of potential, the potential to create a movement capable of changing politics across the island. She continues about how she believes the Puerto Rican government is feeling threatened by this sense of nacionalismo.
Well, the way I see it, I think they feel threatened by this nationalist movement. I think that they're a little scared, or at least they're thinking twice, you know? And if you create a movement and a country unites, it's not very easy to go against them. It's a threat. I see it that, to me, I think they see it as a threat. To me, I believe they see it, this national movement, this thing where Carmen Yulín, she had spoken out loud, Lin-Manuel, René Pérez from Calle 13, he will just blast out loud. So, I see it as like it keeps them thinking. It have them thinking, There's a movement here. And I think that's the reason they attack Carmen Yulín so much, because she's a threat.
Carmen Yulín Cruz is the current mayor of San Juan. She has been sharply critical of the Trump administration's mishandling of the disaster response. Lin-Manuel Miranda is an actor most famous for playing Alexander Hamilton in the play Hamilton. René Pérez, also known as Residente, is a founder of the group Calle 13 and is known for his political commentary almost as much as his music. So at this point in the conversation, my mother has identified a movement among truckers that has spread to a large section of the general public. Then she has added the voices of well-known entertainers, as well as a rising political figure. It turns out Jacob said this would happen.
Right, I think we see this in lots of disasters. We see all this outpouring of wanting to help, right? We're told so often that what happens in disasters is the opposite, is antisocial behavior, looting, and people, all the things that we were told that first week of Katrina that people were doing, that people acting like animals, and rape, murder, pillage, looting. And I think it's, in contrast, what we actually see in disasters is this outpouring of support, both outside the disaster area, right, like what you're talking about, but also inside the disaster area. And the challenge, the real question is how, as you're saying, how do you continue that past the moment of crisis? How do you remember, both in terms of spaces, but also in terms of social practices, how do you remember the way you felt when you were eager to help people who you couldn't in your imagined community? And how do you keep that up in a year or 2 years or 3 years?
The crisis in Puerto Rico is not over. My grandparents got power on Christmas Eve. There are still thousands of people without water. It is absolutely important to meet immediate needs. But in Puerto Rico, immediate needs cannot be divorced from the political situation. On the island, everything comes back to status. What is the political relationship between the island and the United States?
I hope the country progresses and moves forward. We get light. Poor people that doesn't have power, that they will get it, that they will get drinking water, and that we'll get a government that will take us to a real clear definition of what we are. Are we or are we not? It's time we define ourselves. It's been 500 years.
I asked Doña Edna what she thought would happen, and she gave me a list of what she wished for. My mother's wishes for the future all revolve around the status question.
I wish Carmen Yulín will get elected and she could do something about it. I wish Luis Gutierrez really comes and helps and pushes towards autonomy, towards some kind of sovereignty, something, some pact, even an association, something with Washington, and it gets us out of this dilemma. I see this as a dilemma. So I wish that could be resolved. It will take 20, 30, maybe another 100 years. But I wish for that. Because we are and we are not. You can go on like that. 500 years, come on. It's shameful.
My mother still puts a lot of stock in electing good politicians. She hopes Luis Gutierrez will move things forward. Gutierrez is a congressman from Chicago. He announced in late 2017 that he would be retiring from Congress and would be spending his time focusing on Puerto Rico. But my mother is quite excited about Carmen Yulín, the present mayor of San Juan.
Carmen Yulín is the mayor of the city of San Juan, and she's a sovereignist. I think she's a rebel. I like her. They call her a pitirre because a pitirre is a bird that's tiny, but it fights anything that flies near it. And Carmen Yulín is that type of woman. And the stateholders and some people that aren't stateholders call her a socialist and a communist, and they say all kind of things about her. But I like her because she's a strong woman, and she says what she thinks, and she has a great knack for asking for allegiance with other groups, and with the Dominicans, and with the gays, and with the people from the Caño Martín Peña. She has a way. That's how she won the city hall in San Juan, asking for allegiance. I like that. She has a way about that.
Yulín, at least according to my mom, won the mayor's race by striking alliances with various groups. This built a power base that tipped the election. Perhaps this is a clue. My conversation with Jacob left me hopeful. He explained that the aftermath of disasters are horrible, and they are also political opportunities. But it is this conversation with my mother that is exciting. She sees the potential for that change all around her. She sees it in truck drivers, on the flags on cars, from entertainers, even from some politicians. What's more, she sees that change coming if and when these disparate parts come together. She saw a model for that coming together in Yulín's mayoral race. Of course, there are no guarantees, but there's a chance. And all it takes for everything to change is a chance. You can find more information about Change Over Time at changeovertimepodcast.com. I also tweet at Daniel Alt Hist. Take a moment to rate this 5 stars. It helps people find the podcast. Safe travels. Tell me who you are.
I'm Doña Edna, your mother.
This is Change Over Time, a podcast where I think historically about things I geek. I'm Daniel Horowitz Garcia, the alternative historian. Before we get started with the show, I'd like to do a shout out to another podcast. Take a quick listen.
Hi, I'm Martin Baumann. I'm the host of Story Untold, a podcast about ordinary people with extraordinary lives. From traveling the world and working as a journalist, I've seen that everyone has a story to tell, and on this podcast, you get to hear those stories. Story Untold is about the incredible things that happen in life, the moments that change everything. Head to your favorite podcast app and search Story Untold, or head to storyuntold.blueberry.com. Enjoy the show.
Puerto Ricans, you guys are very easy to identify. Most Latinos, you got to listen to the Spanish. Puerto Ricans, I give it up. You're easy to identify because there's always a flag nearby. Puerto Ricans love the Puerto Rican flag. And I know why. Because no one's looking for you. You can be as proud as you want. All day long. If you don't know the Puerto Rican flag, it's very easy to identify. It's red, white, and blue. It has one big star on it, a triangle, and it's like the American flag, but tweaked. It's like the Cuban flag, but backwards in the colors. Yeah, you guys love that flag. You will put that flag on anything. Freaking bumper sticker, hat, t-shirts, wallets, a baby's born.
Today's episode is a continuation of the Aftermath series, a multi-part look at Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria through the lens of my family. This is a continuation of the conversation with my mother, Doña Edna Garcia. This part of the conversation focuses more on Puerto Rico's relationship with the United States and a bit of a history lesson. In the last episode, my mom talked about how many people on the island are flying the Puerto Rican flag. She sees this as a sign of rising nationalism. During the conversation, my mother also talked about why this simple act, flying a flag, has such importance on the island. Here's more from my mother, Doña Edna Garcia.
It started with the truckers. They were the first one to hang a big Puerto Rican flag on their trucks. But then it has filtered out to everybody. I think it's a good opportunity to create a movement to change the way politics are in Puerto Rico. And I'm very glad to see every car with a Puerto Rican flag flying high and the houses with the flags up high. Thank God that now we have the freedom to show that flag, to put it up in your car, to put it up in your front porch or up high in your house. Because there was a time up to practically the 60s where if you show that flag like I have it in my front porch, they would come at night. The police had a department that it was called Departamento de Inteligencia de la Policía de Puerto Rico. And they would come and they would charge me with being a socialist and a communist and I wanted to take over the government, and I will disappear into the night and I will have all kinds of charges and I will be in jail just for showing my flag. Now you can hang the light blue one or the dark blue one, so long as it's a Puerto Rican flag. So it's good. It makes me very happy when I see everybody with that flag in their cars.
The law my mother is referring to is the gag law, also known as Law 53 or La Ley de la Mordaza, passed in 1948 and signed by a U.S.-appointed governor. Modeled on the Smith Act, the law made it illegal to display or own a Puerto Rican flag. It even made it illegal to say certain words, like patria. The law was used to suppress activists for independence as well as anyone else who disagreed with the government. It was eventually repealed in 1957.
The original flag, it's the one with the sky blue triangle. And the navy blue triangle is what we Puerto Rican call the Muñoz flag. Muñoz was an independentista. And he decided, when he ran for politics, he decided to create his own party, which, okay, it was okay. But at the same time, he created the navy blue triangle flag, what they call to please the Americans. Because that's not the original flag. Puerto Rican flag is with the sky blue triangle. But, people say, and I repeat it, that he did it to please the Americans. That's why they call it La Bandera de Muñoz.
Muñoz is Luis Muñoz Marin. He was the first elected governor of Puerto Rico in 1948. Before him, governors had been appointed by the U.S. or Spain. Originally in favor of independence, Muñoz is best known for helping to usher in the current political status of Puerto Rico. This was done in 1952 through a plebiscite. My mom has a lot to say about plebiscites. Let me explain some stuff here. On June 11th, 2017, Puerto Rico held a referendum supposedly to determine the political status of the island. There were three options: statehood, independence/free association, or keeping things the same. More than 97% of the vote went to statehood. That's pretty decisive, yes? It's all figured out. Except, no, it's not. Most everyone who didn't support statehood stayed home. Voter turnout was 23%. In comparison, voter turnout in Puerto Rico averages somewhere around 80%. Most people didn't vote because the major parties, with the exception of the statehood party, objected to the process for a variety of reasons. Governor Ricardo Rosselló, a member of the statehood party, has decided to run with the results anyway. More than that, at least according to my mom, he was instrumental in screwing all this up.
It's time we define ourselves. It's been 500 years, and I wish we get a government that will take us to that, but without tricks. If the people want to vote for statehood, fine, but do it clearly. Do it without tricks. Well, like they did in this past plebiscite. First of all, he defined the Commonwealth. He defined the independence. and he defined statehood. And if you don't want to participate on the plebiscite, well, don't do it. I'm going to do it. And he went to the plebiscite with his people, and then they say, well, the statehood won by 94%, I think. But the independence movement didn't go down to vote. The Commonwealth people, the voto popular, didn't go down to vote. It was all the statehooders. It was all aligned so they could show Congress that the statehood won. I believe that if you're going to have a plebiscite, the populares should define their ideology, the PIP. If they're a sovereignty movement, they should, and then the statehood, because the independentistas don't define statehood. That belongs to the statehooders. They define the independence and Commonwealth, and then the independent leaders and the popular leaders said, no, we're going to boycott that because you didn't invite us for to write down the definitions. So they asked the people to boycott it, and the populares didn't go down to vote, and the independentistas either.
So that's where we are now. So what should happen? My mother is a sovereignista. This is an idea that has some popularity on the island, although there isn't an official party representing the position. She defines it here, quite poetically, actually.
A soberanista is, well, it's not really an independentista, but it's someone that doesn't want this Commonwealth kind of government that works towards having a Puerto Rico with its own government, with that we can make our own path, that we can go forward and make our own path, walking with our two legs, without having to depend on everything from Washington. With a relationship with the United States, it doesn't mean that we want to kick the Americans out. It doesn't mean that we don't want the military protection, even the money, the currency. We want a relationship with Washington as two sovereign states. You have your government, you have your laws, and I have my government, and I have my laws, and we have an association of two sovereign states.
My mother has a plan. She looks at the present relationship of some of the former British colonies to the UK and thinks that could be a model.
I think it could be done. I don't understand how come the United States doesn't do like England did. The United Kingdom did that in the 60s with its colony. When it gave its independence to Jamaica, Antigua, Trinidad, when it made a mancomunidad, Barbados, the British Virgin Islands, it's a mancomunidad. They still have the relationship with England. Something happens in Jamaica, in a minute, the British paratroopers are going to be there, but they're able to force their own destiny, to mark its own destiny as a country, to walk its own way. Why can't we do that? Why can't Washington give us that? It should give that to all the 5 territories. Because let's face it, we are a colony. It's an empire, and empires have colonies. It's that simple.
Doña Edna has a vision for a political future. She also has a historical model for implementation. What she's waiting for is a vehicle to get there. When she talks about the flags and the cars and the potential political movement that could be built, that's what she's hoping for. Honestly, she's not the only one. You can find more information about Change Over Time at changeovertimepodcast.com. I also tweet at Daniel Alt Hist. Take a moment to rate this 5 stars. It helps people find the podcast. Safe travels.